Hi all, we're going to look now at Anatoly Karpov's fifth round in Linares 1994 tournament. This started to show that, as well as playing very well, Karpov had some good luck in the tournament. Ivanchuk in this game suffered a horrendous blunder, as we'll see. He plays d4, and Karpov played knight f6, and after c4, Karpov plays his favourite Nimzo Indian defence. White avoids the mainline Nimzowitsch by playing knight f3. And now Karpov plays b6. So he prepares to exert influence on this diagonal with his bishop. Alternatively, the bishop in some variations can come to a6, and actually in the game it did come to a6. After g3, Karpov played bishop a6. There's a couple of ideas here. If White plays b3, then it's provoked a slight weakness on White's queen side. White actually played knight bd2, and actually the knight's not as comfortable here as if it is on c3. And also, White's a bit disconnected from the d4 square. So let's bear those 2 points in mind. After bishop b7, so Karpov is prepared to waste a move, just rerouting the bishop, because it's already done its job of kind of discoordinating White, or making him play that knight to the less comfortable square. Bishop g2, and now we see the second point, this disconnection from the d4 square. Karpov plays c5, so he's immediately putting pressure on d4. Ivanchuk plays e4, and now Karpov exchanges on d4. White temporarily sacks the pawn, he just castles. Karpov now plays d6, so he's quite prepared to play the hedgehog kind of setup, which he squashed in the previous round. So this hedgehog kind of pawn structure. Knight takes d4, and now he's careful not to play the routine bishop e7 here. That would be a very bad move. Instead he plays queen d7. Let's see why bishop e7 is not the greatest idea here. White has e5. So unleashing an attack on the bishop, and then if bishop takes g2, e takes f6, bishop takes f6, so at least hitting the knight, so that after, if White did play king takes g2, then bishop takes d4, and that wouldn't be so bad. But here, White would have a Zwischenzug move, an intermediate move. White could play knight takes e6, and after fe, then king takes g2, and White would have a little bit of an advantage according to Rybka, about half a pawn up. So Karpov avoided that continuation. In this position he played queen d7, so there's no threat of e5, he's protecting this bishop on b7. And now we see rook e1, so Karpov plays now bishop e7, it's safe to do so. And now we see that point I made earlier about the knight being, having a more natural square on c3. Ivanchuk reroutes the knight with knight b1. So he wants to play knight c3. And then the pressure on the d line is resumed as well. Karpov plays knight c6, and after knight c3, Karpov immediately takes on d4. So he doesn't mind the simplification, he wants it. White has the extra space advantage, so if Black can exchange a few pieces off, well, the right ones, he may be able to exploit a square vacuum in White's position. So queen takes d4, castles, and now b3. So b3 seems to be a very logical move. White would seem to have a pleasant position with the idea of bishop a3 and this backward pawn on the semi-open d file. However, Black's position is quite solid here. I think you have to distinguish between good hedgehogs and bad hedgehogs. I think this is quite a good hedgehog. Rook fd8, bishop b2, and now Karpov plays rook a b8. So he's simply preparing bishop a8 to make sure his bishop's always protected. But maybe there's also a future idea of a6 and b5 to generate counterplay on the queen side. h3, and now we see bishop a8. And here, Ivanchuk goes a bit wild now with a slightly loosening move, g4, which actually turns out to be quite fatal tactically later. With this move g4, he is weakening these dark squares a bit, and especially this diagonal. And this is interesting, I believe, because Karpov's move, it seems modest to play h6, but it has ideas now of knight h7 and maybe bishop g5 later. So as well as preventing g5, it is a kind of dark square strategy. And it's actually a dark square tactic which wins the game in this game in an unexpected way. White plays a4 to say to black, you know, that a6 and b5 counterplay will be pointless. So clamping down on black ever playing b5. Karpov plays a6 anyway. So almost saying to white, well, if you move the knight from c3, I might consider b5 later. So now bishop a3. And now queen c8. So that seems to be quite an interesting backward manoeuvre. But if the bishop ever leaves a3, Karpov will have the resource queen c5, trying to exchange off queens. And white wouldn't ever want to take on c5, bc, because of this b file. So this assumes, you know, so white's almost, you know, being virtually pinned by Karpov in a way. You know, his bishop, should it leave now a3? These are some questions. But actually he does move the bishop back to b2 and allows Karpov to play queen c5. So this is already a bit, maybe a strange decision by Ivanchuk. Queen d2 was played, and now Karpov plays knight d7. So this does provide the support for now for bishop g5 in some variations, which Ivanchuk needs to, you know, consider at each and every turn. He plays now rook ed1, and after knight e5, knight e2 was played. So perhaps with the idea of evicting the queen from the c5 square with bishop d4. Now Karpov plays bishop g5. That f pawn is pinned at the moment, so there's no f4. So Ivanchuk plays queen c3, and now we see bishop f6 with the immediate threat of knight takes g4. So Ivanchuk attacks black's queen to move it away from c5. Karpov goes back to c7, and now queen d2, moving the queen out of the firing line. Now we see knight g6, attacking the rook on a1, so white has to move that rook. He plays rook ac1. Notice though that there's a skewering diagonal here, but this doesn't work here because of white playing f4, and white's also got the pressure on the d6 square in this particular position. Karpov protects his d6 pawn now with bishop e7, because in this particular position bishop g5 would be harmless. Let's have a quick look. Bishop g5 here, as well as considering f4, that might be actually quite loosening, but bishop takes d6 with advantage to white here. Maybe. Actually, there's still a slight advantage for black according to Ribka in this position. So bishop g5, maybe f4 is also worth considering here. Bishop e7, and black's still quite solid. But let's return to the game position. Karpov actually just resisted the temptation here to play bishop g5, even though it might be quite a good move. He played actually bishop e7. But now, a horrendous blunder from Ivanchuk. Bear in mind this skewing diagonal, and bishop g5 was already quite good there. Ivanchuk now plays queen e3. And now this is terrible. Bishop g5 is absolutely terrible. Karpov plays it with a big advantage. Because after f4, Karpov has a new resource. Knight takes f4. A temporary piece sacrifice, clearly just winning a pawn. Because after knight takes f4, e5. And the knight can't move because the bishop takes queen check. Ivanchuk just resigned here. It's so it was a game cut short. White's nice looking position just ruins because of the tactics on this diagonal. Ivanchuk was 27-10 at the time of this game, so you know sometimes these You know, even top grandmasters have a bad day sometimes. The threat of bishop g5 should have been considered on every turn, basically.